Hi, everyone. Welcome back to week 2, or session 2, I should say, of this workshop series on dealing with emotions at work. I hope you had the chance to listen to the first session and that it was helpful or at least interesting to you. And as I mentioned in the previous session, this week we're focusing more on the existing sort of research and knowledge on the consequences of emotional labor, in discussing perspectives on whether emotional labor can be conclusively considered a stressor or a negative work requirement. But first, before I get started, I wanted to play this video for you posted by a YouTuber recently named Lily Singh. You may know of her. She has a late night show, but she is originally from the GTA, and she actually provides a comedic kind of explanation or example of emotional norms and how we often spend a great deal of time navigating emotional display. So I'm going to play this clip for you.
You have to consider the impact you're having on people because it's powerful. You can really be caught by surprise, and so the best thing you can do is be as prepared as possible. Birthdays, housewarmings, congratulations on your negative pregnancy test. No matter the occasion, eventually you're going to get presents, and some of them are gonna suck. Pretending to like a gift someone gave you is an essential part of any relationship. My name is Lily Singh, and this is my masterclass. Basically, I like to remember 3 things when opening a gift. Just like when they remake a beloved classic movie, you have to mentally prepare for the worst. And it's important to be able to tell the signs of a disappointing gift. For example, this looks like it was wrapped for me at a store that was fancy enough to wrap gifts. Okay. But on the other hand, this was 100% purchased on the way to the Secret Santa at a gas station. Also, there's a smell. Should there be a smell? Second, when you're opening a gift, it's important to avoid eye contact with the gift giver. The gift won't care if you look disappointed, but the human will, okay? Do not make eye contact. The eyes reveal lies. Third, buy yourself some time, as if you're unwrapping to a sexy, slow jam. Thoughtfully and anticipating you'll be satisfied at the end. Even though 7 times out of 10, you aren't. But once you get a sneak peek, it's go time. See what I did there? Seamless. Train yourself so you have the reaction time of a gold medal Olympic sprinter. Do drills every day. Check this out. Now, this friend should know you think coffee tastes like liquid hatred, but you cherish the relationship. So ignore your moral compass and lie through your teeth about how this is what you've always wanted. Like you're a contestant on The Bachelor. Some phrases to try are, this is so thoughtful, or you shouldn't have, and you shouldn't have been so thoughtful, or go a step further with serendipity. I was just looking to buy this online. No, I swear, where's my phone? And blah, 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 so on and so forth. But don't forget to stick to that story for the rest of your life. Finally, another option. If you find yourself speechless, pretend you're a baby who's just tried ice cream for the first time. Observe. Now, if they ask any follow-up questions, deflect. What's that? Will I use it? I actually saw this crazy documentary about coffee bean harvesting. Yeah, we should go watch it right now. Okay. There you have it. This has been Masterclass Basics. Join me in future lessons to learn important skills like how to send yourself flowers to make your coworkers jealous, or how to not freeze to death in an air-conditioned office, and how to write the perfect vague but braggy Facebook status.
Okay, so I hope that brought some smiles to you, or a few chuckles. I thought that was a really great example of how and where the social rules around expectations about emotional displays are formed and then ultimately translated into different areas of life. One being our places of work. So, continuing our discussion of emotions at work, here is a conceptual model that explains the process and how or why it's been considered problematic. And so, if we understand emotional labor conceptually as a kind of model, we can identify how this may result in negative health outcomes. And in capturing this process is one of the focuses of some of my current research as well. And so I share this because there are often times where this concept is misrepresented in conversations about emotional labor or in articles that you can find online around, what it is or how it's defined. So on the left panel or box here, we see the objective requirement of emotional labor, right? And this includes what is referred to as display rules. So we talked about that last week, if you recall, but they're essentially the display rules and expectations around service delivery. And an example of that is the expectation that we spoke about in the last seminar around, that service with a smile. But in order to fulfill these professional expectations, so we have these requirements for emotional labor in our jobs, right? But in order to fulfill that expectation in our work role, individuals need to engage in an internal psychological process of emotion regulation, right? And so this process essentially entails surface acting and deep acting because emotional labor takes a lot of effort, right? So here, surface acting and deep acting. So these are essentially two ways um, to regulate your emotions internally and psychologically, right? And so the first one, surface acting, is when an individual is faking and suppressing emotions, right? So we can imagine why that would be problematic for a number of reasons, right? And so surface acting is essentially when we're suppressing our felt emotions, so the emotions that we feel, and we're faking that reaction to a customer or client or, whoever you're interacting with. So that YouTube video that we were watching just now with that faking the smile and faking the reaction, that is an example of surface acting. So you're faking how you feel. So the way you feel on the inside is not what you're displaying. And so the other strategy is called deep acting. And so this is a little bit more, this requires a little bit more psychological effort, but it does return more sort of genuine results, right? So when individuals engage in deep acting, they're actively transforming their internal feeling. So that initial feeling of, if we use the same example, disgust or, hate for something, a gift or something along those lines, right? So we're changing our internal sort of knee-jerk reaction, I should say, in order to kind of genuinely express the emotion that we're expected to display. So this is shown to be a healthier sort of skill to have. So in psychologically, the process and what it looks like is sort of talking yourself through your reaction. And so you're kind of talking yourself out of a negative reaction, rationalizing why you should or shouldn't feel that way, and then being able to provide a genuine reaction to then the person that you're working with. So there's no disconnection between how you feel and what you display. So let's take that conversation a step further and we'll try to answer this question of why emotional labor is problematic. And so previous research and scholars have discussed this concept of emotional dissonance. And so what that means is essentially what I sort of described with surface acting, but instead it's a prolonged state of feelings of alienation, so feeling disconnected from your own emotions and feeling. So you're suppressing your emotions in a way that you become inauthentic. And so when you disconnect between what you feel and what you display, over time you can remain in that sort of state of inauthenticity. And the consequences, and research has shown this, is, feelings of losing control over yourself. So your concept of self and your self identity and your genuine emotional expression. It can also lead to generalized anxiety and psychological distress, as well as alienation. But, there are sort of these two bodies of perspectives on this, right? So, although we can easily say, well, yeah, it seems like that would be problematic, and emotional labor is a problematic job requirement, there's actually conflicting evidence on the health consequences of emotional labor. So, some research reports that extended exposure to emotional labor, especially in emotional labor intensive work environments, can lead to elevated stress, decreased job satisfaction, burnout, and emotional exhaustion. So we can think about that in terms of, a lack of sort of empathy or empathy exhaustion. But then on the other hand, there's a second body of perspectives that questions, is emotional labor really negative? Is it negative for all workers? Because, most people, whether they self-select into certain helping jobs or professions or not, humans genuinely enjoy interaction. You genuinely enjoy interaction and exchanges and conversations with people. And so in some cases, there has been evidence that shows that it it is associated with positive health outcomes. So increased job satisfaction, access to those valued job conditions that allow you to connect with people or perhaps help people and feel like you're making a difference in someone's life. And the evidence seems to be leaning towards more of, those individuals who more commonly engage in deep acting as a strategy tend to be healthier and happier. And so, if we think about this, in terms of more sort of digging into the research, we also know that there are a number of workplace contextual resources. So, work context resources that are quite salient in helping to kind of buffer the strain of emotional labor and help to support building the skills to successfully engage in healthier emotion regulation strategies. So, in particular, job resources like autonomy, so having control over your work and how it's done and how you perform emotional labor, so having control over interactions, and social support. So that could look like, peer support, so support from either coworkers or supervisors. Having a supportive work environment reduces the depleting effect of emotional labor on health. And that's particularly true for emotional labor intensive work like, healthcare and other community care contexts, for example. So we know from previous research that building toolkits, right, that help build skills around effectively managing emotions, and, that can involve practicing self-care like mindfulness and techniques like deep acting. So those can really help protect workers in emotional labor intensive work environments from experiencing the negative outcomes and promote, personal and emotional resiliency. And so I know Dr. Kayambashi is primarily leading this session with you guys, but I do want to just, kind of ask you to reflect on this and what I have covered, and kind of ask, what are your perspectives? What do you think? Do you think emotional labor is truly a demand? Can we think about it as something that's negative and demanding, or is it something, more positive? So I ask you to, reflect, what are your thoughts and reflections on this question, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to chat about it in the Q&A session. So it was great chatting with you today, and I hope you guys are all doing well and staying safe, and take care, and we'll chat again next week.
Welcome back to the second part of this workshop. So today we will be talking about the current knowledge about work-related stresses, and the topic is basically, what do we need to know about emotional labor intensive work? So we will be discussing stress and different sources of stress and how we can address them. Before we talk about emotional labor, let's discuss the stress-induced situation in the workplace. First, we need to understand the source of stress in the workplace. What are some of the stresses that affect our day-to-day interaction within the workplace? The workplace stressors have a systemic source. These systemic sources can be due to organizational factor or uncontrollable factors. Organizational level stressors are caused by group dynamic communication skills, which include peer relationships and occupational expectations. However, the uncontrollable factors are not easily manageable. These are situations such as pandemic, which lead to change in the occupational organization, and one has no control over that. First, we're going to talk about the organizational stressors. So, organizational level and challenges of day-to-day interaction can definitely lead to a stress. Some of these organizational stressors include the list that you can see up there. So for instance, workload management. While there are occupational expectations, there must be a balance in workload. Taking too many responsibilities can lead to burnout. Part of the workload challenge is the proper communication. There are times that we fail to discuss being overworked. The workload management, in part, is a communicational problem, which needs to be addressed with your coworkers and the managerial groups. Second part would be work conflict. Workplace conflict is a general disagreement among coworkers. Conflict is an expected part of workplace, as it would be ridiculous to think that everyone agrees on the same idea. However, in many cases, the underlying reason for conflict becomes secondary to the involved parties. Unfortunately, due to poor emotional management, the main source of the conflict kind of derails. Therefore, these disagreements can lead to a toxic workplace and lead to great stress for the parties involved. While the conflict is a healthy part of interaction and definitely can help with development, under a failed emotional management, conflict can cause stress in the workplace. The next part would be bullying. One of the most stressful part of a work relationship is the case of bullying. While workplace bullying is extremely common, especially due to the competitive nature of a work, there is no specific definition for it. So we try to kind of unpack and understand it here. Workplace bullying can cause both psychological and physiological harm to the victim. Workplace bullying victimizes those with less power than their abusers. So if you have a power imbalance, for instance, a senior compared to a junior associate, can affect their day-to-day relationship. These forms of abuse can be a threat to the individual's professional status. They can be emotional abuse, such as humiliation. There can be professional discreditation and devaluation, so belittling one's skill or assigning job that does not match their skills. There can be isolation and obviously overworking. These are various forms of workplace bullying, but there are various forms of workplace bullying. But two of the most common workplace bullying are racial and gender, which are part of like basically targeting the individual's race and gender. So when you look at the racial aspect of it, the racialized people are more likely to experience bullying in the workplace. And the bullying in the workplace definitely leads to workplace stresses. And these bullying are racist in nature. Institutional racism is the normalized racist practice that is embedded in different social institutions, which includes employment, obviously. Many racialized and ethnic minority groups are pushed by their co-workers and managers to fulfill really low-skilled tasks, even at a very high-skilled occupation. Even if they have a very high-skilled occupation, they are always assigned tasks that are below their skill level. Many racialized workers are expected to complete tasks that are not within their skill levels. And this is obviously a form of workplace bullying, which is racially influenced. But what happened is this evaluation of racialized workers, in many cases, is hidden through democratic racism. Democratic racism is when the act of aggression is invisible to others except for the victim. It's when the abuser constantly mentions, but I'm not racist. But the victim noticed the aggression that is coming toward them has a racialized undertone. This is when based on normalization of racism, the differential treatment of the racialized and ethnic minority goes unnoticed. Basically, this is how we do things around here, when in reality, it's just a racist explanation for what is happening. This creates a great deal of stress for the racialized and ethnic co-workers. Therefore, while workplace bullying is more common toward ethnic and racialized co-workers and employees, their visibility is very diminished and in many cases is left invisible. The second part would be gendered form of bullying, which is basically sexist and homophobic and transphobic in nature. So the similar challenges that is experienced by racialized others is experienced by women, non-gender binary, and LGBTQ plus communities. The experience by women is different from other gender minority groups. After all, they are cisgendered and they have certain, their experience is different. Women tend to face traditional gendered expectation to fulfill, women tend to face traditional gendered expectation. They are expected to fulfill emotional and care labor, even though it's not part of their job expectations. These emotional labor includes being emotionally available to address others' stresses. Women are often seen as too emotional and sensitive, which further allows for others bullying them in the workplace. In many cases, women are pushed to care for others, even though if they might be under severe emotional stress. However, if a woman finally decides that she has enough and she can stand up for herself, she's immediately seen as aggressive and unpleasant to be around. Sadly, the B word can be thrown around easily when a woman stands up for herself, to demands her rights back. In such cases, many women decide to remain quiet to avoid the stigma. This part of the emotion work can be very draining, as a person is expected to see the challenges, to be treated poorly, but at the same time, they're expected to bottle up their emotions. Unfortunately, these traditional gender roles that are enforced on women will lead many women to experience the glass ceiling as they lose their opportunities for promotions. Either they are seen as too aggressive or they are seen as too nurturing. So this is another form of gender bullying. Another group that are facing gender bullying are those who are gender neutral and non-binary co-workers, as well as trans workers. These people tend to face outward aggression from their co-workers. In many cases, they are expected to act based on the gender stereotypes and traditional gender roles assigned to them at birth. Many times, they are being misgendered, and sadly, in many cases, they use one's dead gender or dead name in the workplace. So if we have a trans woman, there is a possibility that someone refers to her as him or using her old dead name. So what happens with all of these organizational stressors that can be managed through communicational skills? Many face burnout. And we throw the word burnout a lot, but many times you don't know what it actually means. So burnout, job burnout is a syndrome. It's a syndrome that leads to exhaustion, lack of interest, feeling detached or depersonalized from oneself, experiencing depression due to exhaustion. The person experiencing burnout has reduced desire to accomplish professional goals since they are experiencing fatigue or they're just uninterested in any work related goals. In many times, they don't see a purpose to it. Some argue that burnout is a defense mechanism. It's a way that a person tries to kind of defend themselves against the work related stressors. Others argue it is a way to cope with the work stress. However, either way, burnout it is a syndrome, which we can simply put it that burnout is a work-related fatigue. And it's extremely emotional because it doesn't have to be you're physically tired. Sometimes the mental exhaustion caused by stresses of the day-to-day work conflict, bullying, workload management, that you feel there is no purpose to the work that you're doing. Unfortunately, with burnout, managing stress of work, bullying, unresolved work conflict, job insecurity, which in this case caused by pandemic, and other forms of stressors, we all people who are facing all of this might have a weakened immune system. The weakened immune system can lead to sickness and obviously other stress related sicknesses. These sicknesses can be short term, like a lot of people get a stress related cold, but they can be chronic as well. The chronic stress related sicknesses are such as heart disease or diabetes. So it's very important to manage the organizational stressors through proper communication and through managing the emotion, proper emotion works, which there will be more explanation on that. However, not everything is manageable for us. In some cases, as we mentioned, there are two types of stresses. There are the organizational and the controllable ones, but then we have uncontrollable stressors as well. So emotional labor intensive work environment. Now, we can discuss those uncontrollable factors that lead to occupational stresses. One of the most obvious uncontrollable factor would be the fact that we are facing a pandemic. The pandemic that caused by the COVID-19 pandemic has been a very challenging experience for all of us at the global level. And we are currently completing a research on the consequences of COVID-19 on frontline workers. There are certain emotional and work-related stresses that are accentuated due to the pandemic. So the pandemic itself causes a great deal of stress as we are uncertain about the next day, we are uncertain about when the lockdown will end. A lot of us are in isolation. A lot of us haven't seen our loved ones. We either have the fear of losing loved ones or we have lost loved ones to the pandemic. That itself alone causes a great deal of emotional stress for an individual. However, one of the challenges of pandemic was how our work environment changed. So suddenly something that was very unfamiliar to us became our daily normal. That is remote work. Unfortunately, with remote work, we have these blurred boundaries of work and home. Because before you would get in the car, get into the bus and go to a workplace. That was your workplace. Then you would leave the workplace, leave the work in the workplace, come home and start your home life. But now we have these blurred boundaries. When discussing an uncontrollable factor, we are currently facing the pandemic, as I mentioned, and these blurring of work and home boundaries makes it difficult to separate work from family life. Many remote workers begin to work much longer hours, without breaks in between. As expectations are higher, after all, you're at home. In many times, especially for women, the home and work has no divide. Many mothers are tending to their children's needs while working from home. I know of parents who are talking about how their kids in the class and they have to manage the class and they have to handle how they are using the computer while they have to reach a deadline and submit their work to their manager, to their boss. Even though they're working from home, they are becoming multitasker, and not a very easy multitasker, because you're suddenly having this family life and work life colliding together. So it leads to a great deal of stress. And it becomes rather difficult to have this healthy work-life balance. Because when you have a whole healthy work-life balance, you can lower your stress. And as mentioned, these blurred boundaries are extremely unfamiliar to us. Many of us are still adjusting to it. And what happened is we are constantly seeking on how to manage this never-ending but short-term work routine. Because we have to get used to it as our normal, but we know we are expecting it to end one of these days. But end seems so far away. So it's very important to kind of respect the idea that it might be unfamiliar, but we need to kind of set boundaries between our work and life. The next would be job insecurity. Unfortunately, due to economic crisis caused by pandemic, many are facing job insecurity. Many fear losing their jobs. And this becomes a very common stressors. It can cause a great emotional challenge when you're constantly fearing that you might lose your job. The fear of losing job might put a person who's fearing losing their job, they might put more hours and even agree to participate in positions that might endanger their health. For instance, when talking to teachers and they were told you have to go back to work. No matter how try you make it, like the classes are already overcrowded. And many teachers express concern over overcrowdedness of the classes. But they didn't have a choice. They had to go back to work following up to the province regulation. Many teachers express a great deal of anxiety about returning to work. But then again, the job insecurity forced them to go back to work. So how can that be managed and how can that be addressed? Lastly, fear and anxiety about health and safety. The fear and anxiety about health and safety, it's a very obvious response to dealing with a pandemic. Dealing with pandemic safety is a common concern for everyone. Maintaining one's health and safety becomes priority. And more importantly, if you get sick, your family is in danger as well. So many try to avoid unsafe situation, but what happened is that, for instance, the case of the teachers who were forced to go back to work, even though they try to avoid that unsafe situation, it becomes rather difficult, which can lead to cause a great deal of anxiety and stress. Imagine the thought of going back to work and bringing the sickness, not to yourself only, but also to your loved ones, can add to the stresses of workplace. It might seem as though it's a familiar thing, but it has to do with the stress of the workplace. The fear causes tense and stressful experience within the workplace, which leads to emotional and mental health issues. I hope this was an informative session. Thank you so much.